All right, hello everyone. This is Camille Lang doing the Youth Climate Science program or Youth Exploring Climate Science program, the Sea Level Rise presentation. So with that, we'll get underway here. All right, so you can see this is a presentation that exists in Google Drive. What I usually do is make a copy of the presentation that I originally used and customize it based off of the conversation that I've had with the teacher and where the students are at in their learning before the presentation. You can see the presentation I'm using is for Tide Academy. This is the most recent one I've done. So yeah, with that, let's do it. Okay, so going into teacher mode now. Welcome everyone. Thank you for your time and attention today. My name is Camille Lang, and we are going to be doing a program today called Youth Exploring Sea Level Rise Science. I bet you can guess what we're going to learn a lot about throughout the time we spend together. Before I get too far into it, I just wanted to give you a little introduction to me. My name is Camille Lang. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I work for San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability. The Office of Sustainability is a government entity that's built to serve all cities and towns and everyone that lives inside of the county, not just one specific city or town. Tide Academy is in Menlo Park, but we serve not just Menlo Park, but every other city and town, all the way up to Daly City, out to Half Moon Bay, and towards the San Francisco Bay, like Menlo Park, Foster City, Redwood City. Through this government entity, there's a lot of really important work that we're doing to make sure that there's a sustainable future for all who live in San Mateo County. And the work I do is talking to students about climate change, so that way we know what we're up against by the time we start seeing these impacts happen more regularly. Before I was working at the before I was working for San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability, I was at the Marine Science Institute, where this photo was taken on the left-hand side. This photo reminds me that there's a lot that, like, even though I'm from the Bay Area, I've grown up seeing the San Francisco Bay on one side of the coastline I'm from. There's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot hidden beneath the surface. So this photo reminds me to stay curious, because there's so many things that we unearth when we ask the questions and just listen openly. This is a shovel-nosed guitarfish. It's an animal that's adapted to and evolved between a shark and a stingray or a bat ray. It's really flat like a ray, and it's really big like a shark. And it uses that weird nose, that shovel nose, to dig into the mud at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay for invertebrates. So just another reminder to stay curious, ask questions, and there's a lot to learn when we look beneath what we already know. I also went to Humboldt State University. My degree is in environmental management protection with an emphasis in environmental education and interpretation. I also have a minor in marine science. With that degree, I thought I was going to be working at a state or national park on the coast of California, talking about the wildlife that exists in those coastal spaces. And I'm doing something different now, because working at those kinds of places, like the Marine Science Institute, I noticed that we weren't really talking about climate change and how it's going to impact all these animals. So I was curious to learn more and found a role to help me do that with my workday. So that's a little bit about me. Happy to talk more about that later. But I do find it an essential priority with students to tell them about like how you got here and what interests you have. I do make sure to say, like, I'm from the Bay Area. I've grown up seeing this resource on the side, and then just like asking questions. So definitely recommend, if that resonates with you, to do the same. All right, so looking into today's agenda, we're going to do a climate change overview, then dive in deep to sea level rise, looking at what this problem is and why we care about it, and then unpacking the different problems that we see with sea level rise and local solutions. So with that, let's get underway. Make sure that you have the materials for class today. Usually I have worked with the teacher to decide either we're going to have a digital resource or a physical worksheet that is being handed out to students. This is a great attendance metric. It helps the teacher see what students are getting out of the presentation, and just in general is really helpful for students to have something to do and work on while I'm presenting. So that document also exists in Google. Alrighty, so question 1 in your student handout is asking for you to pause and reflect. What do you already know about climate change and sea level rise? Things that you can think about are, what are those words? What do they mean? What causes those things to happen? And what are the impacts when those things happen? I usually give students 5-ish minutes to write down. It's important that you give students time to write individually, talk with people nearby, and then I ask for everyone to share out loud. So this is the pause and reflect question. When I start seeing more pencils down, more people kind of naturally chit-chatting with each other, I say, okay, let's talk about it with people nearby. What do you already know about climate change and sea level rise? I'm walking around the room, listening closely. And then I ask a few different table groups to share for the bigger group and for students to share that they understand, or we're talking about similar things by gesturing, like doing the same sign in ASL or whatever the teacher has used in the classroom as a teaching tactic to help students like hear that they're all thinking the same thing. If there's time and interest from the teacher and students, you can do a climate change meme. This is something to talk about with the teacher beforehand to make sure they know about. And it's really fun for them to show like what they already know, for them to make a meme, they all get something really silly out of it. So it's up to you if you have time for it. It does end up taking about 15 minutes to do this activity, to explain to students how to go find a meme generator on the internet. They figure out what they want to make and then submit it. This is not a really friendly activity for students that don't speak English as their first language, though. So be mindful of that when coming up with this activity. To wrap up the climate change memes, it's helpful to like see what the common themes are. A lot of students are using like the polar bear meme, talking about ice caps melting, or Leonardo DiCaprio swimming, whatever the meme of the moment might be. And then like calling out what themes you see, if you can all look at them at the same time and same place. And then sharing that like, okay, so it looks like a lot of people in this group are on the same page, that it's hard to come to a decision on how to address climate change issues. We're going to be talking about sea level rise in San Mateo County and how that is a really hard issue for us to tackle as a community that has a lot of different needs and views on how to address sea level rise. So just bringing it back to that. Okay. All right, so let's do a climate change overview. You can see that you're following along in question 3 that's shown on the slide here. So when we're talking about climate change, we have to start the conversation at thinking about the greenhouse gas effect. The greenhouse gas effect is thinking about how our planet is surrounded by our atmosphere that traps greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, causing it to heat up. If you look outside, you can see we can't actually see our atmosphere, but we know it's an invisible bubble that exists that's creating like a greenhouse around our planet. Heat and energy from the sun gets trapped in our atmosphere, and that causes our planet to warm up to a temperature where it's safe enough for us to live here. Other planets like Jupiter and Mars don't have the same atmosphere as we do, and we're not able to live on those planets like we can on the Earth. When the greenhouse gas effect starts becoming an issue is when humans continue to participate in harmful systems that emit too much CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Our atmosphere naturally traps greenhouse gases, and when we're emitting too much, then it gets trapped in our atmosphere and we start seeing impacts. This slide is showing you the sources of greenhouse gases. You can see approximate percentages of the different amounts of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Looking at this slide, tell me what is the most common greenhouse gas in the atmosphere? This is asking just for students to respond back to you. And you say, yes, 82% of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere are estimated to be from carbon dioxide or CO2. What is CO2? When we breathe in oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. This amount of CO2 in our atmosphere is not just from a bunch of people breathing out all the time. Instead, it's from that, as well as the harmful human systems that exist, especially in a developed country like the United States, that are adding excessive or too much greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. You can see that about 29% of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere that are emitted into the atmosphere from the United States are estimated to be from transportation, 29%, almost a third. Close behind is our electricity generation systems, emitting about 28% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Then industry, like the fashion industry, the food production industry, are emitting 22%. And then you can see smaller amounts, like 10% or 9% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere emitted in the United States come from agriculture, and then smaller components from commercial and residential. These are systems that humans contribute to and use every day that help us survive, but it's the amount of greenhouse gases that these systems need to emit to function that's causing really harmful impacts to our planet. The reliance on transportation in places like the United States, and even here in the Bay Area, like we're famous for our traffic, like that reliance and that success of that system existing this way demonstrates that we're going to continue emitting the same amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, and this will continue to be a problem if we don't change how the system works in the United States and more locally as well. So that's the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. Other greenhouse gases are methane, nitrous oxide, and other fluorinated gases. 10% of our greenhouse gases are estimated to be methane that's emitted into the atmosphere. And that's really bad because methane is 84 times more potent than CO2. So even 10% of our greenhouse gases being associated to methane is really, really harmful and causing a lot of impact. So you can spend more time talking about, like, just make sure that you're describing this globally and comparing the US emissions to other countries if you're going to keep talking about this. Okay, so moving into this, I say, so now that we know the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we know what systems exist that are adding more CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, how much CO2 are we actually talking about? We are currently seeing a rapid increase of CO2. The graph that you're seeing here is showing that the CO2 levels today are higher than levels recorded over the past 800,000 years. This graph is showing you that thousands of years before today, the amount of CO2 would increase, decrease, it fluctuated naturally. But since the 1950s, it's only increased. It's currently spiking is the term I usually use with students here. If you think about what's been going on in 1950 until today, you can think about the more recent history of the World Wars and of World War II ending and people moving back home. There's a consumer culture trend that we saw as people started coming back from World War II. There was lost time, lots of memories and safety to make up for while people were fighting in the war. They come back, and now technology has advanced enough that everyone has, or that more people have access to refrigerators, to buying a home, buying a car, having a television in the home now. And then consumer culture through like advertising and media was perpetuating this this idea that you could probably buy more. So seeing technology advance at a rate that was able to keep up with individuals purchasing items and kind of having more increased energy and transportation use has caused a rapid increase of CO2, not just here in the United States. This is like a global metric, thinking about like since 1950, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere for our entire planet have only been increasing. With a rapid increase of CO2, we're also seeing a rapid temperature change. This graph is showing you that the Earth has warmed by an average of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius since 1880. If we're thinking back further in history, past 1950, there was a revolution that happened in the 1880s. I would leave it up to students to figure that one out. You say, yes, the Industrial Revolution. In the wake of the Industrial Revolution, we've seen a temperature trend where our planet is getting warmer. So the Industrial Revolution is another specific moment in human history where technology advanced very quickly, and it kind of changed the game and is creating more harmful creating more access to harmful human systems globally. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen the temperature increase by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. I know 1.8 degrees doesn't sound like a lot. It's not even 2 degrees. Like, what's the big deal here? But when you think about like our planet being a system, our bodies are also a system. When our body's temperature increases by even just a couple degrees, we call that a fever. A fever is an indicator that like it's not safe for you to go to school, something's going on with your body that's making it not healthy or not functioning the way it should be. That system is not working. The temperature increase on our planet and what it's indicating to us is also letting us know that the system is not functioning appropriately. So even a small temperature change is having huge impacts on our planet. And I want you to take a moment now to answer question 3 in your student workbook, thinking about how do you think global warming will be affecting the planet? I know the words global warming are in here, so it will affect the planet by making it more warm. Think deeper than that. We're talking about like as the small temperature increase happens all over our planet, what's going to change? Again, with this question, I would do think, pair, share. They're writing down. They're sharing with small groups that they're sitting near, and then you're calling on just a couple of people to share in the broader setting. Students will bring up things like the ice caps are melting, There's more wildfires happening. It's not safe to live everywhere on our planet. Maybe they've seen more flooding happening. Depending on what's in the news recently, you'll hear that kind of naturally come up with students, which is really interesting. But amplifying, like validating what they're sharing, amplifying that, yes, there's a lot of things that are going to change. And because there's so many things that we have to consider here, we're going to use a tool called a triple bottom line analysis as we navigate this problem and the solutions associated with it today. A triple bottom line analysis is a framework or a table that helps us organize our thoughts, thinking about how a problem or solution is going to impact the environment, equity in society, and the economy. When we're looking at the environment, we're looking at how a problem or solution is going to impact the way ecosystems function on our planet. When we're looking at how it's a problem or solution for equity, we're going to look at how it will impact society or the way people live. Will the outcomes be fair and just for all involved? And then the economy question is asking how a problem or solution will impact the way we spend money, our wealth and resources. Having them separated into these three columns helps us have a deeper understanding of a problem. And when we're designing solutions, we can see how it's going to impact not just one thing and be a band-aid that would help other things, but rather a holistic solution. So we're going to be using this to answer question 4. Okay. So as I go through these slides, you're filling out each section of your triple bottom line analysis, starting with climate change as a problem that's going to impact our environment. Thinking about how climate change impacts our environment, there's a lot of things that you brought up with that last question, thinking about wildfires, extreme weather like drought, extreme storms, and how that will impact the way things function closer to home. We see biodiversity impacts. The variety of life is changing. There's not nearly as many species on our planet that are able to exist with the temperature change going up even less than 2 degrees. We're seeing significant habitat loss in the places that are traditionally colder on our planet. We're seeing more air quality issues that are impacting public health, not just the health of plants and animals that need clean air as well, but we're seeing it impact us. The oceans are experiencing these impacts so much worse than we are because our planet is mostly covered by ocean. It's able to absorb CO2, and that's changing the temperature, the chemical makeup, and all these different problems in our oceans. And finally, what we're going to spend a lot of time looking at today is sea level rise. Thinking about how climate change is causing our seas to rise faster than expected. And they're taking up more space on our planet by thermal expansion. So like land ice is melting and the oceans are taking up more space just because of a smaller temperature change. And that's having tons of impacts on how our planet functions and the areas close to the ocean. All right, so thinking about the next section of this, so we talked about how climate change is going to impact the environment. Ideally, you've written down at least 3 things that are 3 different bullet points. We're going to try to get to 3 different bullet points for each section here. Climate change can impact our health too, and that impacts society, humans. I like thinking about this a lot and making sure that I'm asking questions that keep me curious, thinking about how climate change is going to impact us as people. Because the impacts that we see, like rising temperatures, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and increased CO2, have an impact on the way we can live and function on our planet. This is a graphic that the CDC has put out, making sure that we're seeing these connections between climate impacts and how it's going to impact our bodies. So if we're looking at rising temperatures, we've been talking a little bit about that today already. As the temperature rises on our planet, we see more severe weather and more extreme heat. Extreme heat results in more heat-related illness for people and more cardiovascular failure. So as rising temperatures just continue to happen on our planet, we're seeing extreme heat that's impacting humans and our health. I would write that down as one, is extreme heat causes more health-related illness. Another one, more extreme weather events, right? We talked about severe weather. More extreme weather causes more air pollution, as like there's just more stuff in the air. And if there's more air pollution, then we can expect to see asthma rates increase. It's already more common than someone born in 2010 versus someone born in 2000. It's much more common for them to be diagnosed with asthma, but within the first 10 years of their life. And that is expected to only increase as we see more climate change impacting the air quality on our planet. Another thing that we'll talk more about with sea level rise is as sea levels continue to rise, we see water quality impacts. The water is not as clean as it needs to be for people to use it. And we see more waterborne diseases like cholera and harmful algal blooms start to break out as sea levels are rising. It's becoming much more common for your water to have cholera in it and harmful algal blooms that don't allow the water to have the appropriate oxygen level. So this is just important to understand the problem and find, something that resonates with us as people. Like, we don't want to experience more malnutrition as water and food supplies are impacted. And so we need to know kind of where the source is here, and it's climate change being a perpetuant or something that's causing things to change, like our water and food supply, and that's going to impact our health as people. All right, something else I want to make sure that we touch on here before we move on to our economy piece is that climate change drives in existing inequities. People are already treated differently because of the color of their skin, their ethnicity, their income, their age, and that is not okay. As climate change gets worse, though, we see more injustice happen because climate change does not impact everyone on our planet, everyone in our county, and everyone in our city the exact same way. Knowing that climate change is not fair, there is an approach to this that then the words environmental justice are used to describe this approach to understanding that climate change isn't fair, but we have to make sure everyone's safe and protected. Environmental justice, or the definition I'm going to read, is from the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States. And they've put out a definition that states environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, or age, in the process of improving and maintaining a clean and healthful environment. So this is saying your race or ethnicity, income, or age should not be a reason why you're seeing climate change impact you first or worse. And so it's saying that we know that climate change is going to impact different people differently, and we shouldn't decide on how to protect or be protecting of other people based off of these things that have historically been utilized to treat people differently or justify a thought process. So environmental justice is understanding that we have to do something conscious to make sure that there's fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in protecting where they live and what resources they need to survive, like water and air. All right, so moving on to our final component of the triple bottom line analysis, climate change is going to impact our economy both globally and locally. The countries that are least responsible for global emissions suffer the worst climate impacts. There's small island nations in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that are having to evacuate and move away from the country and never come back to it because of sea level rise. Those countries are not emitting any CO2 are not emitting nearly as much CO2 into the atmosphere, but they're seeing the impacts of climate change first. And it's so bad there that they're not able to continue living in their area. So there's some major injustice with that they're not responsible for all the global emissions we're dealing with, but they're seeing the impacts first and are having to completely relocate their lives and their country even. That country is not able to have an economy when it's trying to adapt to sea level rise or other climate impacts. And then also if climate change is causing it so they can't live there, then that economy disassembles as well. Thinking about the small island nation of Kiribati is slowly going underwater due to sea level rise. There's many islands within this island or within this country that are already submerged, and their local economy is not able to function when it's underwater, of course. But then what they need from their economy, how much money they need to adapt to sea level rise, they can't afford either because it's happening so quickly. So that's one thing I would write down for the economy piece, is the countries that are least responsible for global emissions suffer the worst climate impacts. Another concept that's important to highlight on this slide is that there are different countries that are the culprits or the main proponents of burning fossil fuels and adding excessive global emissions into the atmosphere. And they're represented by these the more bloated shapes on the map. You can see the United States is very bloated. We're one of the top emitters of CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, along with China, who's currently the first proponent, they're emitting the most greenhouse gases. Although China is emitting more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere every year, the United States has been emitting the same rate, and it's only been increasing for a longer amount of time. So technically, we are the most responsible for this, and seeing very few impacts happening more locally in our country. So that's just like something to be mindful of, is like our human systems that exist in a developed country are emitting more CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and we're not seeing the impacts. And so it kind of further affirms and condones the way our economy functions, in that we can continue using these systems and having a great time doing all of this harmful human activity, while other countries are going underwater in the process. You can also think about supply chain issues. This is a fun one to think about with students. If they've ever had an Amazon package delayed, does their Amazon package get shipped from a nearby city or town, or is it coming from across the ocean? And if that place that you get your things from across the ocean is experiencing a different kind of climate impact, like a wildfire or extreme flooding, are you going to be able to get that thing you ordered on time? What other things might be coming up in the supply chain that are impacted by climate change that might make it difficult for you to get what you need? So yeah, thinking about our local economy is going to change a lot too, with like how we pay for and prevent and react to extreme weather events. So I'm thinking about how money has to be spent for job training, so there's enough people out there that know how to deal with an extreme storm, and what it's going to cost to deal with the damage of another extreme storm if we have one in the area. All right, so this kind of talks more about the inequalities that naturally happen or that happen as climate change continues to impact. We see more marginalized, low income and communities of color in the United States face the worst climate impact. So this isn't just something happening globally. We also see it happening in the United States and in San Mateo County, where there's parts of San Mateo County that have been traditionally redlined, so that way they're communities that are affordable to a more lower income bracket. And now there's many communities of color settled in these areas that are seeing the impacts of many climate change impacts, like sea level rise, high heat, and transportation issues. So it's happening globally and locally, and really big problems to try to solve all together here. Okay, so usually I'll take a break here, or this is like the end of the first presentation. I come back to the classroom another day. And I preface by saying, like, next time you see me, we're going to talk about the local impacts of climate change, including sea level rise. So at the very least, give them a stretch break. This is a lot of bad news. They should get a break. All right, so let's go into local impacts of climate change, starting with the temperature change in San Mateo County. So when we're talking locally, we're going to talk about the county that we all live in. And you can see from this graph that the average annual temperature in San Mateo County has gone up by 1.8 degrees Celsius, and that's more than the US average, which has been 1 degree Celsius. The temperature change in San Mateo County has a lot to do with the amount of fog that historically has been in this area, and how much fog reduction we're noticing over the past even 30 years. The way I would have students fill out this, like, question 5 is at least 2 bullet points per section to give a little fact of, like, in San Mateo County, temperatures increased by 1.8 degrees Celsius annually, and the temperature increase is explained by the lack of fog in the area. Those are like the 2 bullet points I would give. So the temperature is increasing here more than other parts of the United States. And another impact that we're seeing is extreme weather in the form of high heat. High heat days are defined as days where it's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in San Mateo County. And in 1995, you can see on that map to the left that there was 13 high heat days observed. Those high heat days are the orange dots, and they're in the south part of San Mateo County near Pescadero. If you drive south from Half Moon Bay, you'll run into Pescadero on the coast. And then you can also see that there were high heat days in the East Palo Alto, Redwood City area. Not many, though. Based off of the information we got in 1995 and what we keep seeing every year, we're predicting that by 2030, there'll be up to 21 high heat days. And you can see more places are being impacted by that, not just on the coast in Pescadero, but like a belt at the bottom of San Mateo County, starting in Pescadero on the coast and going inland. And then more people in this Redwood City, East Palo Alto area are going to be impacted. And then with these numbers and metrics, we're predicting by the year 2070 that there could be up to 35 high heat days. That's over a month of high heat if that were to happen all at once, and significantly more people in San Mateo County would be impacted by this. You can see a lot more people in Pescadero area, South San Mateo County, and then a lot of people that are near the San Francisco Bay side of San Mateo County will be impacted. These maps also do a really great job of explaining that like not everyone in San Mateo County is going to experience high heat days, just like further solidifying that idea that like climate change is not going to impact everyone exactly the same, even though we all live in the same county. We might live just a few cities away from each other, but high heat days won't be such an issue in Daly City like they will be in Redwood City. Okay, another type of extreme weather we need to talk about that we're seeing major impacts of in the area is precipitation and like drought. So kind of those two things happening together. In San Mateo County, this most recent year, I try to like ground it in whatever's been happening recently. And so the precipitation and drought situation lends itself well to making it contextually relevant to students. I remind them that it rained a lot from December 2022 into February, March of 2023. There were over 13 different atmospheric rivers that touched down. And so there was extreme precipitation. We saw terrible flooding. Lots of our infrastructure was not built to have that much water, and there were many things damaged in the process. Prior to this extreme weather event, there was hardly any rain that we had been getting since I graduated high school in like 2012-ish time. And so there was over 10 years of no rain, and then we saw tons of rain all at once. And that imbalance is how we would describe extreme weather in general. And when we start seeing extreme weather become more normal over time, over a 30-year time span, it's no longer just weird weather events, it's the climate changing in an area. So extreme weather in the form of precipitation and drought have a lot of impact on how things function in San Mateo County, how our roads work, when it's safe to go outside, what is safely drained into the San Francisco Bay, how much pollution ends up in our bays. And as climate change gets worse, we're seeing more extreme weather in the form of extreme precipitation, lots of big, heavy storms, and extreme drought. So those two are really challenging to navigate. And then another impact that I want to address is increased wildfire risk. Although we cannot predict exactly when a wildfire is going to break out, we can kind of see how fuel is doing and predict based on like how much fuel is in an area, how dry it is, and the temperature of the space to decide how much is at risk. This map here is showing you that by 2070, there's a 60% chance that this area might burn. And the area that we're looking at is in this dark red. And so there's just higher risk in this area because of the fuel load. And it's important to know about this now, so that way we can do things to reduce the amount of fuel, to reduce what could burn in that area, but well before we see a wildfire breakout or the conditions that would cause a wildfire to break out. And people are on the case, don't worry. All right, finally, I'm going to bring it back to sea level rise. I know we mentioned that I was going to talk a lot about this, and that we will be diving into more detail. Sea level rise is a huge problem in San Mateo County, and we have the most money to lose to sea level rise as it continues to get worse in the future. San Mateo County is uniquely situated where we have the San Francisco Bay on one side and then the Pacific Ocean on the other side, which again just makes it like so much more risky to as sea levels are rising, we have two sides of our county exposed to the ocean and have a lot to lose there. We'll talk more about sea level rise in a little bit, and erosion. Erosion is the idea that that water can waste away land over time. And we're seeing higher erosion rates on the Pacific Ocean side of San Mateo County and more flooding that's temporary and permanent on the Bay side. Inevitably, no matter what we do at this point with the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and how that's changing how our oceans function, we are expected to see at least 3.5 feet of sea level rise between now and the year 2100, which if I had a yardstick, and if you have one in the classroom, pull it out and hold it up against your body to compare, like it's about up to my hip bone of water that we'll have in San Mateo County if we do nothing and are not better prepared for it. But we have lots of time between now and 2100 to take action. All right, all of the photos on this slide were taken within the last 6 years in San Mateo County. And like these impacts are local and real and are asking for us to adapt to them right now. We see significant erosion rates in Pacifica. We're seeing more temporary and permanent flooding in Redwood City. Sea level rise is increasing in the Foster City area. There's a wildfire that continues to break out once every 4 or 5 years in the San Bruno area. And most places in San Mateo County experience heat waves along with other neighboring counties. So these impacts aren't something to think about in the future. They're things that are relevant and happening to us right now that we need help solving altogether. All right, so let's talk about problems with sea level rise. There's quite a few problems here. So in the past century, past 100 years, we've seen about 8 inches of sea level rise, less than a ruler. But the rate of sea level rise is increasing. So we're seeing that it's not going to stay 8 inches consistently, over the next 100 years moving forward. We've already seen 8 inches of sea level rise, though, in the Bay Area. When we're thinking about how much sea level rise we're seeing and what we're predicting for the future, we have these emission scenarios thought out. The emission scenarios are categorized by low, medium, and high, and then by the projected year we're thinking of here. A medium emission scenario is assuming everything stays normal. We're continuing to participate in the same transportation, energy generation, agriculture systems in the United States that emit a certain amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, and planning for business as normal. Nothing's changing exactly. This is the amount of sea level rise we're expecting to see with the consistent amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. A high emission scenario is talking about a worst case scenario where something really bad happens and we're emitting more CO2 than more CO2 and other emissions into the atmosphere. A low emission scenario is thinking in an optimistic lens and assuming that we're able to make significant change to the systems that exist in the United States and other developed countries, so that way we are lowering the amount we emit every year. You can see even in the low emission scenario that we're predicting 3.5 feet of sea level rise by the year 2100. And so that's over 3 feet of sea level rise, regardless of what we do. Even if things got better, there's an inevitable 3.3 feet of sea level rise. In San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability, we show this graph to people that want help adapting to sea level rise, and encourage everyone to plan for the medium emission scenario, because that's business as normal. Let's just assume we're continuing these systems and we're predicting and so with that in mind, we predict that by the year 2030, there's going to be 0.8 feet of sea level rise. That's 8 inches, which is the exact same amount we saw over the past 100 years. It's 2023 right now. So this is saying in the next 7 years, we're expected to see the same amount of sea level rise we've been seeing over the past 100 years. That's just to give you an idea of how much more sea level, how the rate of sea level rise is increasing so rapidly. By 2050, we're expected to see about 2 feet of sea level rise. And then by the year 2100, it's predicted that we might see up to 6.9 feet, almost 7 feet of sea level rise in San Mateo County. Water, unfortunately, does not stack up nicely. And when it's 3 feet of water, it's actually able to go much further inland because of the way that water works. And so even 7 feet of sea level rise, that could cover parts of Highway 101 and other infrastructure that needs updating if we're predicting for business as usual of almost 7 feet of sea level rise by 2100. So I know sea level rise is a weird thing to think about, but it really does matter. And it matters in San Mateo County for a few different natural things that always happen. We have 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day in San Mateo County and on the west coast of the United States. That means that we have we can predict when there's going to be the highest high tides. And we know for sure it'll happen twice a day. When you add storm surge on top of high tides, a storm surge is usually when the water takes up more space during a storm event, which usually happens during the winter seasons, we see the water line go up, guaranteed. And so if we have very predictable high tide, very predictable storm surge, and we add sea level rise on top of that, you can see in this image that our infrastructure, the way our homes are built, anything close to the coast is going to be at risk of sea level rise very quickly in the future. When we're thinking about the problem of sea level rise, it's important to consider how it's going to impact the environment, the economy, and society, like what we were using with the triple bottom line analysis. But these are the hard and fast impacts. as sea levels continue to rise, we see more erosion. Sea levels are rising, so they're able to chip away higher up on our cliffs and coastline. We also see more temporary and permanent flooding. Temporary flooding might happen during a storm surge event, and then it might be permanently flooded when the level of the ocean is up high enough. And then we see saltwater intrusion. I usually ask students to tell me what intrusion sounds like, and it usually sounds like intruder. Do we like intruders? Do we not like intruders? When saltwater is being an intruder, it means it's coming into our freshwater and groundwater resources. When we have salt water go into the fresh water that we need, people can't drink that water, plants can't drink that water that we're trying to grow, or like on a farm, and that causes a lot of problems. There's currently major saltwater intrusion issues on the coast side of San Mateo County in the lower income communities that are reliant on groundwater to be able to have a functioning farm. So this is already an issue we're seeing, and it's because of the sea level rise rate increasing faster than expected. So these are the 4 kind of categories of impact, and they have a lot of problems on how the environment functions, how the economy functions, and how people in our society work. This is what sea level rise looks like in San Mateo County and neighboring areas. This is the erosion of the cliffs going on in Pacifica, and you can see people trying to adapt and be better protected to it with the rocks that are at the bottom of the cliffs. There's more temporary and permanent flooding in places like South San Francisco and Redwood City. And then there's a famous seawall that we'll talk a little bit more about in San Francisco. That's the Embarcadero. And during high tide, like some of the highest high tides we have during the year, or stormy weather, water is able to break over this famous seawall, and that's demonstrating that it's a problem that needs help solving. All right, so really quickly, just to bring it all together, I want to make sure that we're on the same page of how sea level rise is going to impact San Mateo County using a triple bottom line analysis. This is one of my favorite maps that I use to educate people about sea level rise. So I apologize if we're going to go too far in depth with it, but here we are. So looking at how sea level rise is going to impact the environment, we can see on this map that the orange is representing the erosion rate. So this is a snapshot looking at San Mateo County in the year 2100, if there was a 1 in 100 year storm at that same time. Remember, by 2100, we're predicting that there'll be at least 3.3 feet of sea level rise, no matter what. And if there's a 1 in 100 year storm event, this is also what we can predict. This is the erosion rate on the coast, represented in orange, and this is the sea level rise rate in this area. The things that are in this lighter blue color are either temporarily or permanently flooded by the year 2100, with an inevitable 3.3 feet of sea level rise. Thinking about the environment, you can see places like Coyote Point, that's a county park in San Mateo County, Bear Island Wetlands, that's a new restoration project, and Cooley Landing are all predicted to be underwater. Each of those sites are an essential pathway for birds that migrate through the area to stop and get food. They're a recreational resource for a lot of people, and the wetland habitat in particular is something that is able to absorb excessive CO2 from the atmosphere, so it's helping actually fight climate change to have those installed, and it protects against like storm surge and the flooding. So those are the natural areas. Thinking about how it's going to impact society and equity, you can assume that there's lots of people that live in this area. Foster City is its own city, and it's experiencing really tremendous sea level rise rates. East Palo Alto, North Fair Oaks, all cities that are going to have to deal with sea level rise because their residents are going to not be able to walk to school. They're not going to be able to drive their cars. And when you think about how it's going to impact the economy, you can see a lot of resources at risk here. Highway 101 is the one in particular that I think we should talk a little bit more about. You can see most of Highway 101 that runs through San Mateo County is at risk of being temporarily or permanently flooded by the year 2100. That's a lot of what people use to get to work, to get to school, to get to visit family outside of San Mateo County or in different parts of the county. I used it to get to your school site destination today. And if we don't have that resource, then people aren't able to survive and thrive in this area. Other parts of our economy that will be impacted are like the airport. The airport's predicted to be underwater much sooner than 2100. And that has tremendous impacts on like how we receive goods and services, jobs in the area. There's also a lot of places like our electricity generation plants that are not going to be able to function if the water line keeps rising, and our wastewater treatment plants. These are here represented in these circles. There are wastewater treatment plants in San Mateo County that are predicted to be underwater. Every time you flush a toilet or water runs down the sink, it goes to a wastewater treatment plant to get cleaned before it goes out into the bay. And if we have those underwater, it's going to be a stinky, smelly time. So lots of things that are going to impact not just the environment, but also our society and the economy here too. All right, let's talk about solutions to sea level rise. There's two kind of like categories when we're talking about solutionary change for sea level rise and adapting to climate change and responding to climate change in general. There's adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies. When we use the term adaptation in talking about climate change, those are the actions that we take to manage the risks of climate change's impacts. So, okay, we can see what's going to be changing because of sea level rise in the area. What do we want to do to make sure that we aren't like running into the biggest risks? Maybe we're coming up with a disaster management plan, or installing flood protection. We're doing infrastructure updates. That way we're adapted, knowing that sea level rise is going to get worse over time. The other type of solutionary change that we look at when we're talking about like how to react to climate change is mitigation strategies. Mitigation is meant to, are the actions that we take to reduce emissions that cause climate change. So kind of zooming out, looking at the bigger problem, if we didn't have so many greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, we wouldn't see all these problems. So what can we do differently? We can mitigate by supporting, or like by using sustainable transportation systems, using clean energy, and finding energy efficiency resources. This graph is showing you in the middle that there's an overlap in red of things that check off the boxes: an adaptation strategy and a mitigation strategy. So when we're thinking about water conservation, that helps us adapt to drought, but also mitigate the amount of emissions that we use to clean water and get it to people. Same idea happens with new energy systems, shopping locally and in season if you're able to, having complete communities so we don't have to rely on other parts of the world for the resources we need to survive. You can also see a sweet spot here in the middle saying that education is an adaptation and mitigation strategy. When we learn more, we stay curious, and we share with the people in our sphere of influence, we see more climate change more solutions to climate change happen. This is usually the spot in the presentation where I pause to thank the teacher for wanting to have this be something that we all get to talk about together in the classroom. Like, as an educator that wants to talk about these issues with students, they're adapting and mitigating to climate change. So just a little moment to shout out the teacher and appreciate that intent. All right, so now we're going to look at like local government's role in solutions to sea level rise and talk about kind of where infrastructure updates happen, so that way we're built better for sea level rise. When kind of government or different like local jurisdictions are getting involved in adapting to sea level rise, those adaptation strategies look like what we're seeing here, like protecting, accommodating, or retreat. When we're using the term adaptation here, we're looking at the process of adjustment to the future impacts of climate. In human systems, adaptation seeks to moderate or avoid harm. So we can see sea levels are rising. What can we do to make sure the most amount of people are not getting harmed in the process? And we'll go through these different adaptation strategies, starting with hard engineering, or the protection that we build. Hard engineering is the most historically used sea level rise adaptation strategy in San Mateo County and most of California. The Embarcadero, when you get off Caltrain and you're walking to the Giants Stadium, you're walking on the Embarcadero, which is the oldest seawall in California. And it took over 20 years to build, and it needs updating. So that seawall and the levees that exist in San Mateo, the Tide Gate in San Bruno, are all great at keeping the water in place and fixed, so that way there's shoreline or like a space where humans can walk. It's a great barrier. But you can assume that it is really expensive to build these things. It takes a lot of time, and they need updating over time too. When I look at the seawall, I sometimes will start to think about like what used to be able to live in this area before the seawall was established. And so that's just like demonstrating the idea that there's significant environmental impact. A lot of animals had to move, adapt, or die to have these installed. Another type of engineering, and the engineering that the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability always recommends first and is here to like amplify and make sure is available in the community, is soft engineering or nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions like soft engineering look like the Bear Island Wetland Project or the Baylands, restoring the habitat back to the original way it was with the wetlands. And wetlands specifically have a lot of benefits where they can be a carbon sink. They naturally sequester, grab all this carbon from the atmosphere that isn't just helping us adapt to sea level rise, but also reduce the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere, mitigating the problem. So when we're installing soft engineering nature-based solutions like wetlands or beach nourishment or horizontal levees, they have major benefits for the area, which is why we recommend them. They aren't just adapting to sea level rise by acting as a storm surge barrier, a place to absorb like excessive water first, but they're also able to create habitat, absorb CO2, and wetlands specifically improve water quality because they're built to filter out pollutants. Some major setbacks or some significant cons to consider with soft engineering is that you can't snap your fingers and just have a full functioning wetland. It takes time and it takes job training so that way people know how to manage and build this thing up over time. And it can be really expensive, especially compared to like trying to pay for housing in San Mateo County. Housing is a huge issue right now in 2023. And a lot of people aren't going to want to like move out of their existing home or see that they're like an area that they could have moved into is now becoming a wetland habitat because they deserve a home just like everyone else, right? And so there's some significant cons to consider, although many great solutions when we're doing soft engineering. Okay, two different types of ways to adapt at engineering. And one of them is accommodating. And accommodating is when we're changing the level of existing development so that way it's able to have water flow underneath it. So you can see like there's new floodable developments. This image is of an apartment complex in Redwood City that has a way for water to flow underneath the apartments. This is the parking garage, but if there was a flood or some other significant sea level rise event, people would be able to move their cars out of this area and water would flow underneath the apartments without any damage. A lot of our roads and bridges are built like this too to accommodate for sea level rise and storm surge. And then it's much more common to see homes on stilts in more in the Half Moon Bay area on the beach. Accommodating is great because it helps protect from immediate flooding. And it can be something you can work into your budget when you're building a new apartment complex. But it's really expensive to update and it's always going to need updating. Elevating the road is never permanent. As sea levels continue to rise, you're just gonna have to keep elevating that road. And there's a high chance of pollution in installing these in the process. Okay, last one to talk about together is managed retreat. And managed retreat is the idea of like voluntarily leaving an area because sea level rise impacts are just making it so unsafe to be there. The image on the right in Pacifica is an apartment complex that was evacuated well in advance because they saw the cliffside beneath the apartment complex wasting away. This can be great as a last case scenario. We waited too long. There's not really a lot we could do. So let's encourage people to safely remove themselves from the situation. It's really expensive to do this because it's not clear who's supposed to pay for the relocation of people. If you are paying rent in your house, but now you can't live there, the government told you to leave, who's paying for that new place that you're supposed to go to? And then there's like tremendous pollution that happens when we let these areas kind of waste away into the ocean and become condemned to live on and walk through. And it's just in general not a permanent solution to adapting to sea level rise because it's kind of waiting until the last second and then deciding like, oh shoot, we don't have enough time. You should at least be safe and leave. So yeah, managed retreat is also one that has been used historically, infrequently, but historically pretty common. All right, so let's look at the community role in solutions now. there's a lot of things that we can do that help make positive change to help mitigate against sea level rise and other climate impacts. Reducing your carbon footprint and what you do to burn fossil fuels in your day, like thinking about the systems that you participate in, like transportation, electricity generation, industry, fashion, that kind of stuff. What can you do to reduce the amount of carbon that you use and intersect with? Volunteering if you have time, finding an organization that is aligned with the same values you have, or you would learn from to see like kind of like understanding their values more, is a great way. I know like sometimes it's required in high school to volunteer, but really picking an organization that you believe in, that you think is doing good work, can help a lot. Eating locally and in season, if possible, shopping at a farmer's market to make sure that you're buying locally. And they naturally only have what's in season, which is really cool. Considering alternative types of transportation, so you're not burning fossil fuels with the way you commute, is really helpful. But just thinking about like where do you fit into this, and where are the solutions that really make sense for you, knowing that what we know now. Other solutions that I kind of like think about here are also raising awareness, staying curious, and educating the people you care about in your sphere of influence, the people that are your friends and family that listen closely to you, want to hear what you think. And if you feel comfortable talking to them about this, then this is kind of a spot where you could raise awareness. Asking for deeper, more holistic organization from your school can also be a huge impact, is asking your school to look at its carbon footprint. Where are they like using excessive energy? What maybe infrastructure needs to be updated so it's better built for flooding or power outages, whatever that is. And then again, volunteering is just my favorite way that I got into this at some point in my life. I didn't realize that this could be a job until I started volunteering at organizations I loved in high school. So just always thinking about those. And then there's optional student solutionary projects that I've created for this program that I usually check in with the teacher and make sure they've seen it and have talked through it and thought about how it might fit into existing curriculum. If the teacher is on board to do the student solutionary projects, then I'll spend time explaining how to do that, or turn it over to the teacher to explain how it fits into their assignment for this work. There's different ones here that I have set out, and it's all in a Google folder that will be linked. Okay. And then before I wrap up the presentation, I remind them that the next time they see me, we're going to be going to Coyote Point to observe how county parks have been adapting to sea level rise in an area near them. Remember, Coyote Point is a really significant environmental space. There's lots of recreation there. That's where birds stop to eat, and where people come to play. And Coyote Point is an essential resource that is suffering from sea level rise and needs immediate adaptation strategies. So we're going to explore that together. The things that students need to attend the field trip is closed-toed shoes, an extra layer or two. It's famously windy at Coyote Point, and no one's ever dressed for it, even myself. And then food and water, so that way they have what they need for the basics there. Yeah, so that's what I tell people for the sea level rise field trip. And then on the hike, there's a script that we'll talk about. But yeah, so that's the presentation. Thanks for watching.